Quote, "And those who are slain in the way of Allah, He will not send their works astray. He will guide them and dispose their minds aright, and He will admit them to paradise, that which He has made known to them." Close quote. Surah 47, verses 4 through 6. Appendix A, the Muslim concept of heaven as a motivational factor which results in acts of terrorism. Hello, readers. Just when you thought you had made it through the entire book, you get hit with even more. Well, what you're about to read was originally going to be a separate booklet that I was going to hand out on the streets of the Twin Cities, Minnesota in the fall of 2001 and the spring and summer of 2002 for the purpose of informing everyone about just what the heck is going on in the wake of the September 11, 2001 attack. But instead, I've decided to provide it right here as an appendix or a bonus for you. You deserve to own a book that's jam-packed with as much information as possible. Thank you very much for your support in having purchased this book, as well as the time you've taken out of your busy lives to sit down and read it and prayerfully consider the intellectual and scholastic merits of its contents and claims. I really hope that you've enjoyed it and have also learned a lot from it as well. Las Vegas has nothing on the Muslim heaven. Contrary to the Bible's account of the third heaven being a place of holiness, it is the specific dwelling place of God, who is an essentially holy being. The Qur'an paints a picture of heaven like a gross, wicked, and sinful city. Even a resident of Las Vegas, Nevada, United States of America would say, "Dang, that's one wicked place." They cannot wait to get there. Suicide missions help speed up the process. Once I begin to describe it in a moment, you'll begin to understand why so many young Muslim men and women have absolutely no problem strapping some dynamite onto their chests, getting onto a crowded bus full of men, women, and children who have done nothing to them whatsoever, and then detonating it. You see, since the Quran commands Muslims to commit acts of jihad or holy war against infidels or non-Muslims, when the Muslim is killed in obedience to these commands, they believe that they're going to go straight to the Muslim heaven. They're excited about it. They look forward to it. They can't wait to get there. Well, why is that? Why is it so much better than the life here on earth? Well, let us open up the Quran once again to see what exactly is waiting there for them after they die while rendering this violent service to Allah. When a religion cannot tell the difference between its heaven and a bar, that says a lot about the religion. Quote, "This is the similitude of paradise which the God-fearing have been promised. Therein are rivers of water unstaling, rivers of milk unchanging in flavor, and rivers of wine, a delight to the drinkers." Close quote. That is Surah 47, verse 15. This is perhaps one of the only accurate things that Muhammad ever said in his whole entire life. Anyone who, on this earthly planet, indwelling a human body, who has had some wine or had some alcohol, will agree with him on one statement here. It sure is a delight to the drinkers. Why? Because it makes you enter into the drunken state if you have enough of it. In other parts of the Quran, it describes the drunken state that the Muslim is supposedly going to be in once he arrives in heaven and drinks. Surah 83, verse 22 says, quote, "Surely the pious shall be in bliss," close quote. So now we run into some problems. If you're reading this and you happen to be a liberal Muslim, you're going to interpret this quote-unquote bliss as a figure of speech describing how happy the obedient Muslims are going to be once they're in Allah's heaven. And so you'll definitely disagree with the way I'm interpreting it here. But the context of the 83rd surah is crystal clear. Heaven is being discussed, and it's being discussed in a literal way throughout the entire surah. One cannot interpret the rest of it literally and then decide that only the quote-unquote bliss portion is a figure of speech. This is an inconsistent method of interpretation. This is contradictory. A contextual reading of the surah points us in the correct direction. It is quite clear what is going on in the passage to anyone who reads the whole thing. The righteous Muslims are there in a quote-unquote blissful or drunken state. And the cause of this blissful drunkenness is the wine that they just got done drinking in heaven. If you still disagree with me, just keep on reading the 83rd Surah. Quote, "Thou knowest in their faces the radiancy of bliss, as they are given to drink of a wine sealed, whose seal is musk. So after that let the strivers strive, and whose mixture is tasneem, a fountain at which do drink those brought nigh." Close quote. That is Surah 83, verses 24 through 28. Notice the reference to a heavenly alcoholic fountain, sort of Allah's cosmic tap, as I jokingly call it, from which Muslims will spend eternity drinking alcohol. This is how they will enter into that drunken state, or that bliss, as it's called. Let's go back to Abdullah Yusuf Ali for some light, not just on the interpretation of this Quranic passage, but on alcohol in heaven itself. In the Qur'an, text translation and commentary by Abdullah Yusuf Ali, footnote number 6024 or 6024, on page 1706, says, quote, "The wine will be of the utmost purity and flavor," close quote. He does not deny that literal wine will be in heaven. He uses such literal terms as purity and flavor. Let's read his take on the alcoholic fountain out of which this wine is going to flow. Same page, 1706 or 1706. Footnote number 6026 or 6026 of the Quran, text translation and commentary by Abdullah Yusuf Ali. Quote, "Tasneem literally indicates height, fullness, opulence. Here it is, the name of a heavenly fountain whose drink is superior to that of the purest wine. It is the nectar drunk by those nearest to God, the highest in spiritual dignity. But a flavorite will be given to all according to their spiritual capacity." Close quote. Just to let you know, after he says those nearest to God, there's a parenthetical statement in his note that I skipped over. He's cross-referencing his footnote 5277, which is a note providing commentary on Surah 56, verse 11, which goes deeper into the concept of those nearest to God, which obviously it's the Muslims who went to the Muslim heaven. So he once again does not deny literal wine. He even indicates that it is a literal fountain. He uses the word literal in his commentary, and he refers to physical characteristics of the fountain, such as height, etc., to describe it. He says that a flavor of this wine will be given to everyone in heaven, depending on their spiritual capacity. I guess the greater of a servant you are to Allah while you're on this earth, the more alcohol and the more tolerance you're going to have, the more you're going to be allowed to drink in the Muslim heaven. So the harder you work here, the more alcohol you get. It makes great sense then. The context supports me, and the most popular Quranic commentator in America does not contradict me when I come out and call the Muslim heaven exactly what it is, a big drunken party. Allah allows drunkenness in heaven. I thought the Quran forbids alcohol. It does. This is one of the errors in the Quran. It contradicts itself because of the difference of its teachings of heaven versus the view of alcohol that it teaches Muslims who are still living here on the earth. Check out Surah 5, verses 90 and 91. Quote, "O believers, wine and arrow shuffling, idols and divining arrows are an abomination, some of Satan's handiwork, so avoid it. Haply, so you will prosper. Satan only desires to precipitate enmity and hatred between you in regard to wine and arrow shuffling, and to bar you from the remembrance of Allah and from prayer. Will you then desist?" Close quote. So these verses, alcohol, or wine as they call it here, as it's translated into the English, is put on the same moral and practical level as arrow shuffling, or as we would call it today, gambling, idol worship, or as we would call it, being involved in a religion that is not Islam, and divining arrows, which is a kind of divination popular in pre-Islamic Arabia in Muhammad's time. Divination, we would call it witchcraft, things like that. Today they've changed the terminology and they call them psychics. Different shell but same nut. All right. So all of these things are on the same level in this surah, these two verses. They're all called Satan's handiwork as a group. The Muslim is told to avoid these things so they will prosper or succeed in life. The passage goes on to say that Satan was attempting to disrupt the unity between the Muslims and come between their brotherhood through the instrument of wine or alcohol, as well as to keep the Muslim from remembering Allah and to make the Muslim forget to pray. The Muslim is then called to desist or stay away from alcohol. In Islam, alcohol is sinful. It's an abomination in the sight of Allah. So can you see the problems that these verses pose for one another? Can you see the contradictory nature of the Muslim life on earth and the Muslim life in heaven? Muhammad was not the most intelligent or consistent man to ever have lived, and that's for darn sure. I don't know if he spent too many hours in the desert sun, got heat stroke, got dizzy, was denied some oxygen before reciting the Qur'an to the scribes or something. Or maybe the scribes screwed up in what they heard Muhammad said and they recorded it wrong. Or maybe Muhammad misheard the spirit being that revealed all of it to him. But it's very clear that something went radically wrong with the authorship of this garbage, this confused mess. A confused individual or so-called prophet has given us a very confused book. But do you see the problem? Other than his idea of heaven being no better than dollar drink night at the local bar in your town, we can see the issue of conflict about what heaven is like. And we see problems with the nature, essence, and attributes of Muhammad's concept, understanding, idea, and definition of God. Muhammad's Allah deity is going to have wine or alcohol, which he has declared sinful, which he has declared an abomination throughout all of the Qur'an. We've just read at least one passage. He's going to have this in heaven, in his specific dwelling place for all eternity. How can he do this? Especially since he has also said in Surah 2, verse 219, quote, "They will question thee concerning wine and arrow shuffling. Say, in both is heinous sin and uses for men, but the sin in them is more heinous than the usefulness." Close quote. So in this passage, Muslims are being made aware of the fact that non-Muslims are going to come up to them from time to time with questions about the Islamic teaching or the Muslim position on such and such a topic or on certain life issues. The Muslim who reads this verse is being trained on how to properly answer the non-Muslim asking him the Muslim position on something. And once again, we're told that wine is on the same moral and the same practical level as gambling. We're told that in both are quote-unquote heinous sin. Once again, Abdullah Yusuf Ali, he didn't write his commentary thinking one day a Christian is going to find useful stuff here. He's not trying to help me, but he is, and he doesn't even know it. The Qur'an text translation and commentary, footnote number 240, page 86. Abdullah Yusuf Ali says of Surah 2, verse 219, quote, "Wine, kumir, literally understood to mean the fermented juice of the grape, applied by way of an analogy to all fermented liquor, and by further analogy to any intoxicating liquor or drug. There may possibly be some benefit in it, but the harm is greater than the benefit, especially if we look at it from a social as well as an individual point of view." Close quote. So Abdullah Yusuf Ali, the great Muslim scholar, agrees with me, and he agrees with the Quranic text that though there may be some benefit to getting totally trashed and totally wasted, the bad in getting trashed and getting intoxicated outweighs any good, and therefore On that basis, Allah has declared it sinful. Since Allah is supposedly the author of the Qur'an, then we can only conclude that in the sight of Allah, drunkenness is sin. It is a transgression against Him. It is a crime against Him. Think for a second about where we're at. Think about what this means for the Quranic account that we've just read of Allah's heaven. When we read about rivers of wine, rivers of alcohol, drunken state, bliss in heaven in one surah, right? And then of it being a sin in another surah, what does it mean about the one who wrote both surahs? Allah's contradictory essence. In His heaven we have wine, which He has called an abomination. He has called it Satan's handiwork. It's heinous and sinful in the sight of Allah by His own word. Yet its very consumption will be going on unpunished right in front of Him for all eternity. Tell me that makes sense to you. Tell me that you can see no consistency problem. You can see no logical issue here. You can't say that you don't see it because it's staring you in the face. This big river of alcohol in Allah's heaven is going to cause what He has defined and declared to be sin to take place right in front of Him forever. But this pagan moon deity, he's going to look the other way. There's no mention of a punishment in the Quran for these people in His heaven being wasted. As a matter of fact, He even seems to be approving of it by the wording He uses to describe heaven. But you see in other verses, like what I've just quoted above, He hates alcohol. So which one is true? Either He hates alcohol and drunkenness, or He approves of it. Muhammad cannot quite make up his mind about which picture of Allah he wants to paint. The law of non-contradiction. Two conflicting statements that fly right in each other's face, that contradict, cannot both simultaneously be right because they contradict each other. 1 plus 1 cannot be 2 and 11 at the same time. Either one is right and the other is wrong, or they're both wrong, but they cannot both be right. A cannot be both A and non-A at the same time. I do not disagree if somebody wants to call both of these wrong, because I think the whole Quran is wrong. But you see the problem here. It is a great logical error. Allah's imperfect essence. If the account of His heaven described in the Quran is accurate, then Islam's God, Allah, is imperfect. He is what we would call a finite God, a limited God, a pagan God. In order to be perfect, Allah has to be perfect in all ways and in all attributes. Everything that makes Him God, He must be perfect in them. But if His heaven is going to be one big drunken alcohol fest of partaking in what He has literally declared Satan's handiwork, and if this is going to happen right in His presence, but He's going to allow it to go on unpunished for all eternity, then He's less than perfect in the area of justice. Perfect justice demands punishment for every single sin in word, in thought, in deed, in heart, intent, in motive. The failure to punish even one sin is imperfect justice by definition. Or, if there's gross sin taking place in heaven and He simply looks past it for all eternity, He could even coexist with it. It has no problem with it happening right in His dwelling place. Then He fails to be perfect in the area of holiness. A true holy concept of God is violated. A crime is committed against Him when He sees sin. Muhammad's Allah, His concept of God, seems absolutely unbothered by sin taking place in His home. Allah is then an unholy God. So as we've just seen, Allah is limited. He's finite. He's pagan, whether it's in the area of justice or holiness. Whichever one you want to call Him, unjust or unholy, take your pick. I really don't care. I think He's screwed up in both places. We still, at the end of the day, have an imperfect picture of God in Islam being painted by the Islamic concept of heaven. Now, if you're a Muslim reading this, or in this case hearing this, you really have to stop and think about that for a second. Do you really want such an imperfect, such a pagan, such a limited concept of God dictating the course of your life? Do you want to trust your eternal destiny? Do you want to bank it on something like that? Do you want to back this wicked horse? You don't need such a deity guiding you. You don't need such a deity instructing you. You cannot lean on, you cannot trust, you cannot depend on a God who is this radically out of whack like Allah is. I highly encourage you to renounce him, his counterfeit book, his false prophet, his fake religion, and come to the knowledge and acceptance of the truth, which is Christianity, the resurrected Messiah, God the Son, second person of the Trinity. The one true and living God who always has existed, is now currently existing, and always will continually exist eternally, simultaneously as Father, Son, and Holy Spirit. This God who spoke and the universe jumped into existence because he told it to, he desires a relationship with you. He's not a God who's going to fail you. Allah obviously has major problems. Allah's heavenly hose. Not only does the Muslim terrorist have rivers of liquor and a drunken bliss of alcohol to look forward to, but he also has eternal sex waiting for him as well. Surah 52, verses 17 through 20 say, quote, "Surely the God-fearing shall be in gardens and bliss, rejoicing in all that their Lord has given them. And their Lord shall guard them against the chastisement of hell. Eat and drink with wholesome appetite, for that you were working. Reclining upon couches arranged in rows, we shall espouse them to wide-eyed houris." Close quote. Surely the God-fearing, and which God is in view? This is the Qur'an, so it's Allah. Hopefully you can follow that. Those who fear, respect, obey, and worship him are the ones in view in this context. We're talking about the Muslims, the dead Muslims. Where are they going to be? It says they shall be in gardens. So if they die having obeyed the 5 pillars of Islam, or the 6th if you count jihad, and if Allah feels like letting them in, because you never know what kind of mood Allah is going to be in. He may will it, he may not will it, who knows. But if he wills it, they're going to be in his heaven. And bliss, we've already seen, drunk as a skunk, rejoicing in what their Lord has given them. So they're rejoicing, they're happy to be there. And everything that's in this heaven was given to them by Allah himself, including alcohol. And their Lord shall guard them against the chastisement of hell. So the fact that you're in heaven, obviously you're being protected from the alternative place you could have ended up. Hell is the opposite of heaven. So this is another good indicator, if you don't already see it, that heaven, the Islamic concept of heaven, is being talked about in this passage. The righteous, the obedient Muslim will be kept away from hell because he's in heaven. Eat and drink with wholesome appetite. So it's very important that you notice grammatically the allusions to human physical appetites. Allah's heaven is a very carnal place, isn't it? It appeals to the flesh, it appeals to the sin nature in a big way, but it lets you know, this is one of your indicators that we're dealing with not a figure of speech at all. Okay? For that you were working. So the real motive behind all terrorism, all persecution of non-Muslim people, all persecution of non-Muslim religions, anything Muslims do, the 5 times they pray a day, the zakat, the giving to the poor, etc., etc., the end motive says, for that you were working. For everything in this Muslim heaven, that's what's motivating and energizing and bearing along everything they do in their life to end up in this place. That's the end game. It's simply to get there and receive these things. Reclining upon couches arranged in rows. And so far in the context, nothing grammatically or in any literary, there's no literary clue here that anything is a figure of speech. There's nothing in the text that would lead us to believe that it's not to be taken as a literal couch. Everything thus far has been a physical description of a literal place, even to the point of referring to human appetites of the physical body. And plus, in ancient Middle Eastern literature, could a couch really be a figure of speech? Could it really be an analogy about anything anyway? What the heck would it symbolize? The couch is really representative of the struggle of human life as you try to pay the mortgage. Get the heck out of my face with that bull crap, please. All right? There's no spiritual interpretation allowed. This is a raw, brute, physical, literal thing going on. And we, Allah referring to himself here in the plural, shall espouse them. When you espouse someone, what are you doing? You're joining them in a marriage. What is the ultimate consummation of marriage? It is a sexual act, right? So what he's saying is we're going to hook them up with someone to have sex with. In particular, it says we shall espouse them or hook them up with a sexual partner. And who are these sexual partners? Wide-eyed houris. The question becomes, what the heck is a houri? Well, another way we sometimes write it is hoary. When we put it into English, we say whore. Some of our brothers who are real hillbillies leave out the R and they say ho. It's used of a woman that people don't really value very much at all. It's associated with a person whose only purpose or desire in life is to sexually please men. They have no other purpose. They have no other plan. Their life signifies nothing else. This kind of woman is seen as good for nothing on the planet other than sex. When someone says, you're a hoe, you're a whore, it's meant to be an insult. It could also refer to a prostitute, all right? But it's a derogatory term. It's an insult. You walk up to someone and say, hey, your ma's a whore. Your ma's a hoe. Back in the day, you'd say your ma's a hoary or a houri. That's what we're dealing with in Allah's heaven. So in Allah's heaven, Muslims not only get to drink from a river of alcohol and remain absolutely smashed for all eternity, partying, but then you get to have eternal sex, be joined sexually to Allah's heavenly hoes, to Allah's prostitutes. Allah even goes on to say in Surah 52, you look at verse 22, quote, and we shall succor them with fruits and flesh such as they desire. Close quote. More references to both food, which is physical, and flesh. You're getting flesh. You're getting tail. You're getting a chick. Being given as much flesh as they want really means as much sex as they want. It's carnality run wild. It's sex, drugs, and rock and roll in heaven. Islam is merely the abstaining from wickedness for a lifetime in exchange for an eternity of immeasurably more wickedness than they could have ever gotten access to, than they could have ever gotten their hands on during their entire pilgrimage on this planet. It is sin delayed, but it is not sin denied. This is a brilliant religion that Satan has designed. It certainly does its job well, and it appeals to people's sin nature from within, in order to get them following after a false god and a false religious system by dangling the carrot of a wicked heaven in front of their faces. So far today in 2001, nearly 1.5 billion people have been suckered in through teachings just like this. Let's look at help in interpreting this very verse from Abdullah Yusuf Ali. His text translation and commentary, page 1438 or 1438. His footnote number 5058 or 5058, 5058 says, quote, there is no question of sex in heaven. Could it be any plainer about what's being taught here? Do you see how Islam's concept of heaven could motivate terrorism? Imagine if you knew that when you died, you'd have a big, drunken sex party to look forward to. Well, guess what? No fear of death anymore. Nothing in this world phases you because you literally believe in your intellect and in your conscience that you're about to enter into something much better, something much more fun. So on this planet, there's no fear of consequences. There's no concern about the damage you're about to do to the people that you're going to leave behind. Who gives a crap? They're back there on that planet, on that third rock from the sun, trying to pay rent and cook dinner and take kids to soccer games or whatever the heck But you're on your way to heaven. You're getting alcohol. You're getting prostitutes. Who cares who you've just hurt back there? It's all behind you now. You've got a party to get to. You've got girls waiting to have sex with you for all eternity on heavenly couches. But you'll only have a go at these chicks after getting liquored up in rivers of alcohol. Of course, doing something for Allah on your way out might be the grand finale. Heck, if you perform a suicide mission, it'll only speed up the process and eliminate the waiting period before you get to enter into this place. It might even earn you a great bonus when you're judged. So why not strap a bomb to yourself and take a few infidels, take a few non-Muslims with you on your way out of this life? Or why not make your exit be something like, I don't know, hijacking a plane and crashing into a building occupied by the enemies of Allah, i.e. non-Muslims? This kind of heaven provides that kind of mental attitude to Muslims and potential terrorists. When you combine the mental attitude produced by this heaven with all of the jihads declared in Muslim countries against America and against the Western world, it's very clear to see that Islam is going to be able to produce more anti-American soldiers to participate in more terrorist attacks against us for generations to come. As I've said before, so I say again now, September 11, 2001 was not an isolated event. It was just the beginning of a very long campaign. Like the alcoholic festival portion of heaven, the sex party portion of heaven also runs into problems upon examination. The first problem with it is the quote-unquote ceremonial impurity, which, according to the Qur'an, comes literally from the act of sex itself. The Qur'an talks about sex being a dirty thing and about an elaborate cleaning process that the Muslim here on earth has to go through after sex. He or she has to do this just to be able to qualify to approach Allah. It's very ridiculous, but it's in the Qur'an, and we're about to look at it. We're about to read about it and see what the heck Islam says for itself about itself. Before prayer, they have to enter into what is known as wudhu. W-U-D-H-U for those who are listening. Look it up. It's a state of cleanliness that one has to enter into before Islam's wicked deity is even going to bother to view you as someone worth listening to. It's all about total physical cleanliness. I've never fully understood why they believe it. Prayer's a spiritual thing, yet for some reason they have to be physically clean to pray. I guess you can be as spiritually dirty as you want, but as long as you're physically clean, it's all good. Kind of a backwards focus, but what about Islam isn't backwards? So check out the Quran, Surah 5, verse 6, quote, "O believers, when you stand up to pray, wash your faces and wash your hands up to the elbows and wipe your heads and your feet up to the ankles. If you are defiled, purify yourselves." Close quote. Basically, this verse is teaching the Muslim how to enter into this wudhu state so that Al-Ilah, their pagan deity, will listen to them. Imagine a God who loves his people so little that listening to their prayers is conditional and it's based on their physical cleanliness. Amazing. Anyways, the term saying, "If you are defiled, purify yourselves," is literally translated in Abdullah Yusuf Ali's translation of the Quran this way. Quote, "If you are in a state of ceremonial impurity, bathe your whole body." Close quote. The idea here is that the physical act of sex leaves one physically dirty, and this physical dirtiness disconnects one from being able to get a prayer through to their God. It cuts off the line between them and Allah. So I guess the signal gets dropped on the cell phone call or whatever. Weak attempt at comedy. So before attempting to pray to him, they need to get rid of this physical dirtiness. Check out Abdullah Yusuf Ali's footnote on this very verse, and you can see how Islamic scholarship views this very issue. Footnote number 703, quote, "Ceremonial impurity arises from sex pollution," close quote. That's on his page 242, where he's given commentary on this passage. his footnote number 703. And again, there's a parenthetical statement where he wants you to cross-reference one of his other notes. But Ali calls the physical condition one is in following sex. He calls it, quote-unquote, sex pollution. This is Islamic theological jargon, okay? Sex pollution. So this renders the Muslim too dirty to approach Allah in prayer, and therefore the cleaning process described in the Qur'an becomes necessary. If you've had sex recently and you're a Muslim, you have to bathe your whole body before you can even talk to Allah. Is that wild or what? Knowing this about the teachings Islam puts forth concerning sex, it raises an interesting question about the Islamic concept of heaven. Is physical sex down here on earth blocks the Muslim from being clean enough to approach Allah in prayer? Then why isn't one of the main activities taking place right in his dwelling place in heaven? If you're on a couch banging some heavenly prostitutes, having eternal sex with Allah's heavenly hosts right in Allah's face, how can he be looking favorably upon you? You're sex polluting yourself right before him. You're becoming too dirty to pray to him from far away. If sex makes you too dirty to talk to him from far away, then it certainly makes you too dirty to be in his presence right in front of his face forever. A homosexual's paradise? In 1995, rap singer Coolio put out a song entitled Gangster's Paradise on the soundtrack of a movie called Dangerous Minds, starring Michelle Pfeiffer. The song described his younger days, his times growing up as a kid in a certain inner city neighborhood. In this particular neighborhood, there were drugs, there were gangs. These kinds of surroundings, this kind of cultural setting led him to refer to that very neighborhood as a gangster's paradise. While the surroundings in the Muslim heaven have similarly led me to refer to Allah's dwelling place as homosexuals' paradise. This is because that, as I've researched this issue, I've discovered another alarming part of the Quranic teaching concerning heaven. Not only will there be lady prostitutes to commit fornication with for all eternity, but there are going to be attractive young men to commit sodomy with. This is absolutely sick, but it's there. Check out the Quran. I've already quoted this passage in part to demonstrate the sexual nature of the Muslim concept of eternity, but now I quote the passage in full to demonstrate that a portion of the sexual nature of the Muslim concept of heaven is actually homosexual. Surah 52, we're going to be looking at verses 22 through 24. Whereas I just quoted one verse before, I'm going to do 3 of them now so you can see the whole picture. Quote, "We shall succor them with fruits and flesh, such as they desire, while they pass therein a cup to one another, wherein there is no idle talk, no cause of sin, and there go round them youths their own, as if they were hidden pearls." Close quote. In case this doesn't lead you to understand what the heck is happening here, we're going to look at Abdullah Yusuf Ali's translations of this very passage, verses 23 and 24. Quote, "There they shall there exchange one with another a cup free of frivolity, free of all taint of ill. Round about them will serve, devoted to them youths, handsome as pearls well guarded." Close quote. All right, so that's Abdullah Yusuf Ali's translation of Surah 52, verses 23 and 24. So the fact that there are youths in heaven devoted to the Muslim male for service can easily be seen when one looks back at verse 22 and realizes the sexual context. It reveals the capacity in which these youths are going to serve them. Back in verse 22, we see that Allah is providing the Muslim, quote-unquote, flesh such as they desire. That's clearly what the heck is happening in this passage, and verses 23 and 24 are an expansion of that sexual idea. The analogy of the youths being described as well-guarded pearls is a reference to virginity, since in the Allah's Heavenly Hosts section of this book, which we just saw, the women available to the male Muslims are virgins, it is consistent, it's fitting that the young men available to male Muslims to sodomize are also anal virgins as well. No man has ever sodomized these youths before. The Muslim man entering heaven is going to be the first one to have that opportunity. So in a very sick sense, the little boy's quote-unquote virginity will have been preserved, specifically waiting for the Muslim man until he gets to heaven. Virginity is a valuable thing because once lost, it cannot be gotten back. It is therefore a thing to be desired. So a valuable thing such as a pearl is a good description of it here. And the fact that this pearl has been well guarded indicates that the virginity of the young boy's rectum has been protected and preserved. And describing the men as young indicates not only that they're going to be in excellent shape physically, that they're going to be appealing, but also that they're going to be little boys. And any Muslim man who's attracted to males, there you go. So in many Islamic countries, the rape of young boys by older men is all too common. Some of them get sodomized so badly, so often, and over so long a period of time that they eventually lose their sexual orientation. They become numb to this sort of thing, even to the point of thinking that it is an acceptable practice. And later on, maybe they become the predator themselves for the next generation. Sex becomes a random act that can be had with anyone. Male, female, old person, child, goat, whatever. And when they grow up, they pass this disgusting behavior on to the next generation of young boys. This is a well-documented fact in many Islamic writings. A full treatment of it in this is beyond the scope of this particular writing, but I can do it in another document if I ever feel like it. In his description of heaven, Muhammad was trying to appeal to so broad an audience that he even included something waiting there for the many Muslim who desired to sodomize little boys. To this day, the Muslim suicide bomber not only looks forward to rivers of alcohol and heavenly prostitute women on couches, but also the sodomizing of little boys for eternal homophiliac and pedophiliac gratification. Quote, "There is no question of sex in heaven, but the type of grace and gentleness of womanhood having been applied in the word whore, the type of the handsome and well-formed strength and splendor of manhood is mentioned here in the allegory of pearls, of the purest water, well guarded from weathering and unsullied by rough usage," close quote. That is his footnote number 5058 or 5058 from his page number 1438 of the text translation and commentary. He's commenting on this very verse. So of the verse about the little boys, Ali even says that, quote, "there is no question of sex in heaven," the same way that the prior verses I've cited refer to the Muslim male's use of the houris, or the whores, or the prostitutes, or the hoes, is the same way that the youths are spoken of here. They are of the most handsome, the best possible physical shape, and their virginity in their rectum has been protected and preserved by Allah, having been guarded against what Abdullah Yusuf Ali literally calls, quote-unquote, rough usage. I guess the newly deceased Muslim male is going to be the first one to get to apply the quote-unquote rough usage to the little boy. This is vile. This is disgusting. But to the Islamic terrorist who's into this sort of thing, he's motivated to kill and be killed and to go home to the Muslim heaven so that he can have the first shot at little boys who've never been touched before. Sick, sick, sick. The final verdict about the Islamic concept of heaven. We've seen how the human lusts and the physical appetites that reside within every human heart, in the sin nature, as it were, are literally the focus of Islam's heaven. It's like an exchange. Basically, Allah's heaven says to the Muslim, you deny these things during your earthly life, and I'll let you have them on a greater level during your eternal life. Since you're not chasing these things during your stay on the earth, instead you're fighting in Allah's great cause of jihad to spread Islam and killing non-Muslims wherever you can find them. If you die while you're doing it, then you get to go to this heaven. As a matter of fact, since getting into heaven through any other method of obedience is conditional and based solely upon, quote-unquote, whether or not Allah wills it, there's no assurance of salvation in Islam. Participating in this kind of warfare is seemingly the best way to go. It's the only guarantee of a place in heaven. If a person waits to die a natural death before getting to enjoy this evil and disgusting place, they may have to hang on for nearly a century. That's nearly a century of pretending to be a moral guy, pretending to be pious, pretending to obey the law, pretending to be peaceful, while inwardly burning with unsatisfied lusts for things like alcohol and fornication and homosexuality and drunkenness. That's an entire lifetime of working a job in the secular workplace and raising a family and paying rent and cooking dinner and suffering through what people go through during the course of a normal human life. But if they blow themselves up and if they take some non-Muslims with them to death, well, this reward's going to come quicker, and the reward is going to be even better because of their obedience to the Quranic jihad passages. This kind of heaven and this seemingly easy way out of the present task of life is the top reason why Islam is going to have absolutely no problem recruiting as many terrorists as are necessary for as many decades as it takes to topple the Western world in both Western Europe and the United States of America and the North American continent. The only way to stop it is to offer these Muslims an alternative system of belief other than Islam. Offer them the alternative of truth, the truth of biblical Christianity, the truth of the resurrected Messiah, the truth of the real heaven, not the heaven of Muhammad's sick and sinful imagination. Brian James Shanley, Columbia Heights, Minnesota, November 2001.